Welcome to Planet, People, Mining, Voices at the Crossroads of Mining, Communities, and Sustainability. I'm your host, Allison Koppel. I have over 20 years in this space in 5 mining companies. I then found myself in transition when this podcast emerged through reconnecting with my incredible network, whose insights may be heard as one-off episodes on other platforms, while here they take center stage. If you're also a trailblazer with stories from the field, a mining colleague curious about what these people even do, if you're interested in this field of impactful, motivating work, or from another industry, join us as we celebrate their contributions, demystify their roles, and explore the community and sustainability issues they tackle. And for our Spanish-speaking audience, busca Planet People Mining en Español. Today's episode, it starts with people. Today, to kick off our podcast series, we will focus on people and speak with Beatrice Opoku-Asare, VP of Culture and Capability at mining company AngloGold Ashanti. We talk about how good community relations begins from within the company, how having a purposeful culture that builds on empathy, kindness, and strengths can radiate out to positive relationships with communities. We dive into understanding what equity looks like in the mining industry, where to start to have an intentional culture, and advice for others that Beatrice wouldn't have had just a couple of years ago. Beatrice will share about her zigzag career, beginning in Ghana as an environmental scientist and stretching to occupational safety and then now human resources. She has lived in several countries, including now with her husband and 2 kids in Colorado. Beatrice will be talking on her own behalf and not speaking on behalf of any company. Beatrice, so good to have you here on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining.
Of course, Allison. There was no way I was going to be able to say no.
Well, let's just get started and dive into it so others can get to know you as well. Can you introduce yourself? What are a few major life and work milestones?
So these days, I'm trying to introduce myself not as my job, but more as like who I am.
I love it.
So I'm a daughter, first of all, and I'm a sister as well. I have 4 sisters who all live all over the world. I'm a wife. I'm a mom. And I think what I would add is I'm a very purposeful and intentional person. I'm really on a journey trying to make better decisions, make intentional choices, not just kind of breeze through life like, an automated machine, but I'm just trying to be more thoughtful about my choices and how I spend my time. And, even if I'm spending time on something, making sure that it's making an impact and that I'm also not burning out or, putting myself last. And then, the other aspect of me, I'm a professional and I work in human resources now.
You already, Beatrice, you have brought up things that you have taught me about being purposeful. And so let's dive into that in the professional context. Explain to me a bit more about I work in human resources. Tell me about your current role and why you see your work as important, why you're putting your purpose into this work.
I think I'm doing some of the coolest things in human resources. Human resources is broad, but my current title is Vice President for Culture and Capability. And over the years, even this title itself is very new, even to me, because you can see that it's different aspects of human resources that have been put together to make it more purposeful. And so my work really entails talent management, which would include all your succession planning, business continuity from a talent perspective, talent reviews, talent mapping. So everything about, your talent and trying to make sure that you have the right people in the right role at the right time for today and the future is one aspect of my role. And then another aspect of my role is really around learning and capability, which is how do you make sure you have the right skills? How do you make sure people have the right resources and support to be able to deliver their role, but also to be able to develop and learn? A third big bucket of my work is inclusion, diversity, and equity. And this is almost like double clicking on these two things I've mentioned and beginning to see if there are any gaps, if a group of people are actually being disadvantaged or not, really making sure that there's equity across your processes and your programs and your decisions. And then the last piece I would say is the culture piece, which really is about what kind of experience. If I break it down, it's like, what is the day-to-day experience that you want people to have? And is that what they are having today? And if they are not having that today, what do you want to do to make sure that you create that day-to-day experience for them? And if they're already having that experience, how do you, enhance that? And how do you leverage that, over time? So yeah, these are the four big pieces of my work. And of course, I'm like, this is cool. I get to do this on a daily basis.
And it reminds me of when you and I met. Well, actually, you and I met when you were working in Ghana and I came for a visit. But when you and I
Yes.
really worked together, is you were leading inclusion and diversity at Newmont. And you have taught me so much about that space. What and at that time, and of course now you're broadening and bringing so much of that learning to a broader sense on what you just described. And I see you in your work, and even as you just described it, so passionate about what you're doing. I would even say it's like your calling. I don't know
Oh,
if you speak to that, and if you would agree that this is your intended path. What moment in your career did you realize that people, working with people, and the work that you are doing is your calling, is your career path?
I don't think there was one moment because, you and I have known each other for a long time. So you know that my career is a zigzag career. It's very non-traditional. I studied in environmental science, moved into occupational safety before I ended up in human resources. And I think if I've learned anything, it is about being open to newness and, things that I don't know. I majored in forestry and silviculture. That is all about plants. It has nothing to do with humans. I guess what I'm challenging is that there isn't usually just one thing that makes you feel like, this is what I want to do forever. I think it's about being open and picking what you're doing in that moment and making the most of it. When I was in safety, I thought I would be doing safety forever. I loved it, until I got into human resource and I was like, oh, I like this too. I pick it as this is what is my calling in this moment in time. And how do I make sure I make the best out of it?
Beautifully. I love
Does it?
Yes. Yes, and it also shows, I mean, back to what you were explaining before about your role and about what creating culture at an organization is about. And I'm hearing,
hmm
maybe stepping too far, that how do you create this culture of openness, this culture of trying new things?
hmm
I don't know if this reflection that you just gave on your own career reflects in what you want to create in your work.
It does. It does. One of the things that I learned from, a CEO that you and I worked with in the past was that, he would always say, control what you can control. And he would talk about it from a business perspective. But I feel like that is something that can be applied to life. You have to figure out what you already have and what you can actually change, what is really within your means. I always joke that, even my 12-year-old and 9-year-old have opinions, right? So it's how much more changing the minds of grown-ups in an organization. it's not just about change. Sometimes it's about how do I bring what is already really good to bear so that everybody can actually acknowledge that this is actually really, really good. And then we intentionally, I love leveraging strengths because it's so hard to change our weaknesses and identifying what is already working really well and magnifying that. Everybody can do it because it's already working really well.
So many things you just said. One is I always repeat that phrase of our former CEO, control what you can control. I say that in
Yes.
so many instances. And so I love that that impacted you as well. And opening up about your role and culture and building on strengths. I use that practice as well, especially when working with communities and their development plans. So often we want to come in and say, what do you need? And what's missing? And I like to come in and say, what do you have? And how do we make
Mm-hmm.
that stronger? And it changes your mindset of how you
Mm-hmm.
approach conversations. But going back to the organization itself and to your role and creating this culture and how that builds into the other buckets of work that you lead, do you, and this is a general
Mm-hmm.
question, necessarily about your current work at your current organization, is there anything you feel is sometimes misunderstood about your role and that you find yourself having to clarify a lot?
Generally, and not just like, in an organization, but generally, people think that culture change is at a macro level. It's like it's a big program that you're trying to work at with beautiful PowerPoints and strategies. And I think that is a big misunderstanding because culture change is at a very micro level, at an individual relationship level. It's about the conversations and the experiences that I'm having with my leader, the conversations and experiences I'm having with my peers and with my direct reports and other people in the organization. I believe that is where culture change actually happens. I think the other misconception is around, inclusion, diversity, and equity. And because it can feel a bit emotional to many people, depending on where you sit, whether you're in a majority group or you're in a minority group, it can feel like there's nothing I can do. Or it could also feel like, why is everybody blaming me if you're in the majority group, right? And I think, that is where another misunderstanding there. It's really just about ensuring that people are having equitable experiences. So again, the culture I talked about, which is on a day-to-day experience basis, is everybody actually having those experiences. Some people getting better access than others, better access to relationships, to support, to, sponsorship, to different goodies, as maybe you would put it.
Especially building on the second part, you started with equity. And I like how you explain that and to see if I understand it correctly. Because at the base of it, if certain groups of people are not I like that, accessing the goodies in the same way that the majority group is, their
Yeah.
experience is going to be different. And
Yes.
I think that pinpoints a basic tenet of this work is that the people within the organization being able to access, like you said, access to relationships, that is key, access to sponsors. I mean, down to it, sometimes just access to personal protective equipment, PPE. I
Mm-hmm.
just bought my
Mm-hmm.
first female fitting boots. I put it on LinkedIn. I think it was 2021 or 2022. And I've been in mining since 2006. For years I had these very clunky boots and honestly it would make my feet tired. I wonder, and I never questioned it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I just assumed that that was the norm. And even on a deeper level, I'm going to step and say an even more personal story, but it triggers this discussion on equity. Facilities at a site,
Mm.
facilities at a site, especially a construction site. Sometimes a very established operation probably has female facilities. A construction site probably has the porta potty for everyone. And
Mm-hmm.
the number of times for years, I would just not drink water that day. I'd be at 4,000 meters and not drinking water
Mm,
because I
mm-mm.
knew there was no real appropriate place for me to go. I didn't want to have an awkward conversation with my colleagues. I didn't want to experience what the facilities that were available. And so I put my own health and safety at risk to deal with that. And there's probably no way that I was as able to perform to my fullest ability
Mm-hmm.
just due to that, physical limitation. And so I think the focus on equity as a first tenet of how you present the work is, to me, resonates a lot.
I like the personal example you shared because I'm sure many people in male dominated industries would have similar examples, if not the same. And I think one thing you said, which over the past couple of years, I'm being more assertive about, is you said you didn't ask for the PPE. I think it's also because you're usually like the only woman and it feels weird. But I think we have to flip that script and ask more and be more assertive about a need when it exists and teach that to the next generation.
Or usually I was the only female in the situation. And even though I think that I'm a confident, assertive person, it
Mm-hmm.
did go into my head of I just didn't even think to make a fuss.
Yes.
I'll deal because I'm strong. And it
Yes.
took me a while to realize no, my strength is speaking out, speaking up,
Mm-hmm.
and changing things.
Mm-hmm.
It took me my own journey to figure out that I was not the strong one and holding it in, but I am the strong
Mm-hmm.
now because I'm speaking up and
Yes.
making changes. Yeah. So your
Absolutely.
comment of equity just that really resonated with me
I
of
love
how
that.
we're addressing that within the industry. You laid out very clearly some key aspects of what's misunderstood about your role. Is building on that, what would make your role easier?
If everybody was just a little more intentional about, what they said, the decisions they made, how they did things, what they did, noticing who is speaking, who is not speaking, on their own, people would recognize that Allison, doesn't speak at the meeting. Or they would realize that, oh, all the people who have English as their second language do not speak first in the meeting or do not share their opinion. Or, that actually as a leader, I'm spending more time with Allison or Beatrice than everybody. And the second one is really about just kindness and, empathy. One of my friends, Nara Altman, and myself have been researching empathy for 3 years now, and the role of kindness and empathy in the workplace and how we don't always prioritize that. It's not a trait that is celebrated, but it's such an important trait because without empathy in a workplace filled with human beings, I just don't know how that workplace is going to be safe for the humans who work there.
I think
Um,
that word captures so much of what you've been talking about and what I have brought for years into my practice with communities empathy. And for those who have taken with me trainings on how to best engage with stakeholders, you'll hopefully remember that the very first principle is empathy.
mhm,
And to go on a bit about why I was so excited to have you on this podcast is because I fundamentally believe that good community relations start from within the organization.
mhm,
So much of the work externally is reflective of what there is internally. And it starts with the culture and it starts with the values of the people and then the systems and practice and how we work externally. But what you're saying around if it's an organization that takes a moment to be intentional and using the practice of empathy is, okay, Beatrice is yelling at me.
Mm-hmm.
Before I respond, let me take one moment and try to see this situation through her eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what I think you've been talking about is I'm not just going to react like, well, I'll yell right back.
Right.
I'm going to take a moment and try to think, oh, well, if this was a community meeting, the company's truck just went over Beatrice's lawn.
Mm-hmm.
How would I feel if a company truck just went over my lawn? And when you put yourself in the place of the other person, and it literally can just take a second or 5 seconds, it changes fundamentally how you respond and how you go forward in that conversation and creating a space. And you said another key word, safe, creating this safe space. And you and I have talked about before psychological safety, creating
Mm-hmm.
this environment where people feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you create that, because you have demonstrated, I'm here to listen to you, to try to understand where you're coming from, it creates a different path for that conversation.
Absolutely. What you said is exactly what I'm talking about. And I feel like it solves so much if we can just practice these two skills more. Um, being intentional and being more kind or being more empathetic.
Absolutely. And the kindness, such a simple word. I'm going to actually think how to integrate that into my trainings because I don't have that as part of my repertoire of a specific, I guess, practice. But if it's
Mm-hmm.
integrated and built on, I'm going to try to see through your perspective
Yeah.
and I'm going to respond with kindness. And
Right.
even though I know I'm right, I didn't go, it was on the border of your property. I had the legal right to put the truck there.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever, eventually might be the outcome of this discussion. If I first understand from your perspective, well, yeah, that would make me annoyed too. Okay, I'm going to try to help this person feel better, have a better outcome of this situation, just to have that as a lens on top of whatever I intend to respond with.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it would have a much more productive conversation out of that.
They're human being and they deserve to be treated with kindness, even if they are wrong, even if we figure out that the sky is blue and it's not red.
I love that. I love that. So, what's in the future? What do you see as a future state that's anchoring how you're thinking and what's emerging?
Yeah. Well, the future, what I see in the future, number one, a change and emerge in generations. I want the workplace to embrace that and not be like, oh, this is not how we did it in the past or the good old days, to rather be like open, like, I'm learning so much from the Alpha generation and Gen Z that I did not know. I want us to be ready for the generational shift and to be able to leverage what that shift is bringing and then together create a new generational experience.
I didn't know what the generation is called after Gen Z, and you've said it a
It's
couple.
Alpha, Gen Alpha.
Gen Alpha is like our older kids in a few years. So
Yes, it's like, yes, exactly.
I mean, it's the generation, like my oldest daughter's 14, who was touching a phone as a toddler, knows how to do cool presentations on the computer well beyond my capabilities.
Yes.
And on a deeper level, it wants so much more direct access to things. They want to solve things immediately. It's the immediate generation. And I like the reflection that you brought to the workplace is they want to solve this challenge immediately.
Hmm.
They want that instant gratification. And how can we make that as a positive? We've been talking for a bit and you've been talking about different things that have inspired you over the years, but who has inspired you over the years? Who are your mentors and sponsors?
I've always viewed And I don't think it was intentional, but I always viewed mentorship and sponsorship more as not as like a title that I put on somebody, but as different actions that I receive over a course of over time. I have never really had like one person that I would say this person is my mentor or this person is my sponsor, but I have benefited from mentorship actions and sponsorship actions from different people over the course of my career. Example is you, right? Like you give me space to think and to not overscript what I want to say. A leader that I had who helped me transition from environment to safety, who was like, "Hey, I think you can do safety." His name was Alan Kinsley Asamoah, and in Ghana, and he passed quite a while back, but he was the environment manager at the time. And he was like, I think you should consider, safety. You would enjoy it. When I came into safety, there was a gentleman called Francis Coleman who also was a like guru in the occupational safety space. And he taught me a lot of the things that I knew I had to learn. Mark Tharp was one of my, which was one of my sponsors as well. He was like, you could take this course so that it bridges your learning. I'd say one of my friends, Marcel, in some of the most difficult times in my career was there and really, lended kindness and empathy to me, and he didn't have to. And, currently my current boss, Lisa Lee, who absolutely gives me the benefit of the doubt. And I think when we talk about sponsorship, people think sponsorship is just people using authority to open doors for you, but I think also people just being able to give you the benefit of the doubt, your opportunity, and trusting that you can, you're able to do that without question is one. Marcelo Godoy, who is one of the executives whom I've known for many years, I would say is also a key on that. And also, when I don't know something, I just go to the person and say, do you mind spending 15 minutes with me? I have like 2 questions that I would like to ask you. And these are the specific questions that I want to ask you, about. And,
I like how you framed it. This doesn't mean that it's been a specific program. These are
mm-mm,
all actions that all of us can do in whatever organization we are. If I see an opportunity for perhaps a younger professional or professional who's just starting out in the field, but I believe that this person could do the job, that I mention that I use my platform to mention that I
yes,
am available. If someone says, I need 15 minutes, I have 2 questions for you. And I love that approach because who doesn't have 15 minutes to help somebody
right?
if they're using kindness as their lens? That's
Yes.
very practical, Beatrice. I like that. And just to close off, any advice you have for others in your field to succeed?
So a couple of years ago, I had to redefine what success meant to me. What is that success and what does that mean to you? And that, I've been there where you think success is progressing in your career from one level to the other. And maybe that is not what success means for you at this point in life. So, and for me, I think that if you're not careful, you will get lost in what what the world and society is defining as success for you, and then you pick that and that becomes your path. And I feel like I'm in a much better space in terms of clarity about how clear I am about what is important to me and what success is. And then try to figure out how you can achieve that in bits and pieces. So that would be one of my advice. The other one I would add is to be intentional about how you're using your time on this earth, where you're spending your time and ensuring that it's aligned to what you've defined for yourself as success. So if you've defined that you want to spend time with your family or you want to progress your career, you want to change industries, you want to do this, Are you spending your time in such a way that is actually going to enable that? I mean, the last one I will add is do not forget to have fun on the way. Sometimes you're working towards a destination of, oh, I want to do this, I want to do this, and we forget. It's like, okay, now you've gotten there. And so what? You did not enjoy the process. You were just so burnt on trying to get to that point that you didn't really enjoy the process, make friends. You and I have known each other for a long time. We don't work together anymore, but you and I talk a lot. We chat a lot. We speak in person, we speak on the phone, we do stuff. And it's because it's a relationship that I want to keep. And it's a relationship I've picked up along the journey as well, because at the end of the day, it's important. It's something that is important to me. And I would just like to add that this would not have been my advice 3 or 4 years ago. If you asked me to give advice about career success.
I love those lessons, B, and I have been learning them intensely over the past month or so, especially the enjoy the process. I tried to enjoy the whole of my career, but in the last few weeks, starting this podcast and going on a different path, I echo that and how important it is to wake up each day and make it intentional, enjoy it. And I think that ties together a lot to what you've been saying throughout this podcast about intent. Yeah. So I thank you for that. And thank you so much for joining this podcast.
Of course. Thanks for asking me to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. If you like what you heard, please provide a 5-star review, and amplify.